Well, welcome to week 5 in our Lent series, our final session today. If you've joined us from all 5 sessions, then you will be given a special gold star. No, you won't. But we're thrilled that you've joined us for the whole course. And if you're just popping in on this one, welcome to you as well. We're delighted you could join us wherever you are, whoever you are, and whatever you believe. My name is Ruth Bushhager. I'm the Bishop of Horsham. I'm joined in conversation by Will Hazelwood, the Bishop of Lewis. And we are staying in John's Gospel, as we were last week. Verse 20, there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the feast. So there's a crowd of pilgrims coming up to this great city, and there are some non-Jews among this crowd, some Greek people. And they came to Philip. They were Greeks who had questions, non-Jews who had questions, spiritual questions. And quite understandably, they found Philip, the disciple. And I think they must have chosen Philip because Philip is a Greek name. So they probably thought he would be a good person to ask their questions. He's a follower of Jesus, but he's got a Greek-sounding name. So maybe he would be able to explain Jesus in a way that they can understand in their own kind of cultural language and their own sort of worldview. And so they come to Philip because he was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and they had a request. And what a request it is. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. What a question. God has put in their hearts and minds a hunger, a curiosity to see, to meet with, to have something revealed to them about Jesus. And in John's Gospel, there's loads on the theme of people being able to see. He loves light and darkness. We've spoken about that last week. And John is fascinated by blindness and by sight. And this theme culminates here. People who can physically see, but they want to physically see and spiritually see as well. They want enlightenment. And so they asked to see Jesus. And Philip went to tell Andrew, and Andrew and Philip go to tell Jesus. So it's a story of non-Jewish evangelism.
Yeah.
As we're kind of starting to think ahead for the church, being not just a church for Jewish people, but a church for all people. So it's quite exciting, isn't it?
It's massively exciting, and I love the way that John chucks this right in the heart of the... This isn't an afterthought. This isn't on a cold, wet Tuesday when nothing else was going on, this happened. We've just had the Triumphal Entry into Jerusalem. This is right at the centre. And the second thing I love about this, Bishop Ruth, that you've begun to talk about is these Jews go to find Philip because they think that name gives them some sort of link initially. And that certainly plays out in all of the stats that we have about how people first come to faith. What's their first encounter? How do they first see Jesus? Well, it's usually not through those of us who wear kind of dog collars for a living, who do this allegedly professionally. It's usually actually through people that they can relate to, a work colleague or somebody at school who someone shows them something of Jesus in their life, or that they just actually know even is a practicing Christian. So the challenge for us in all of that is actually, do people know us as followers of Christ? Do they know it not just in what we say, but in what we do and how our lives are lived? Would those around you know that you are a Christian, apart from the people who are part of your worshipping community? So I love the placing of it. I love the fact that very, very clearly this is for all people. Evangelism is for each of us, and we can't be a church without it. It's critical.
And it's important, isn't it, for these Greeks to have Philip to turn to find that there is a follower of Jesus who has something in common with them as inquirers and as people who are curious. And that's one of the reasons that I'm really passionate about diversity in the church. And over this season, we've been not just challenged by the coronavirus, but we've been challenged by the Black Lives Matter movement. That does the Church of Jesus really reflect, and does the Church of England really reflect the diversity of people in our communities properly? And do we really honour and build up and intentionally raise up leaders who are as diverse as they possibly can be? Because the greater the diversity of disciples, the greater our mission and its fruitfulness.
Yes.
Because it's quite hard to turn to a complete stranger who you have nothing in common with and say, I'm actually looking to see Jesus. I want to know about Jesus. Would you tell me? Actually, it's much easier if you're a single mum to turn to another single mum and say, well, you seem to know him. What is this? Yeah. Or if you are from India, to turn to another person who looks like you or speaks like you. Or if you're old or young or come from a less privileged part of the country, or if you are male or female. And the more diverse our communities, the more the chance is that someone like us will say, can I see Jesus? I see something of him in you and I'm curious and I want to meet him.
So true. And I think, also, I think it's so easy for us in our culture to assume that people don't want to hear about Jesus, to assume, we get fed constantly a media view that declining church attendance, people aren't Christian anymore, that people are increasingly agnostic or atheist. It's just not true. The minute you look at the stats of those sorts of things, they haven't changed very much at all. People are incredibly curious as to the spiritual. They may not be actually able to say, we would like to see Jesus, but they want to know what this is about. What is it? Because they are drawn to a spiritual life. We are not just drawn to everything that we can scientifically prove. In fact, none of the things that really motivate us are things that we can scientifically prove. People are drawn to this, and I think actually, the pandemic and things like the Black Lives Matter have reminded us of something, that actually these things matter, and we need a deeper discernment of who we are and how we're linked, but we need people we can relate to within that.
Jesus replied, verse 23, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And this points me right back to the wedding at Cana in Galilee, where Jesus says to his mum, no, my hour has not yet come. And now, at the end of the gospel, just before Holy Week, he says, now the hour has come.
And it's almost as if that response beforehand is the trigger for that. Now that these people have come, right, now we get to living out the events of Holy Week.
That's amazing. I've never thought that before. I think you're right. The inquiry of the Gentiles is the prompt, in a way, for him to explain all that's going to happen in the next few days. That's really interesting, to bring all people to himself, to reconcile unto God all things in heaven and on earth, so that all nations will be drawn to the throne room of the Lamb. Yeah. It's so rich, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So Jesus is pointing to the cross in all this teaching, his death, and yet that's what in John is his glory. The Son of Man is going to be glorified. And it's fascinating that it's not the resurrection primarily in John that is the place of glory, or even the ascension, or Jesus' enthronement in heaven, that's where we see him glorified. If we want to see the glory of Jesus, we look to him naked and ashamed and whipped and beaten and dying on a cross. And that's very countercultural, isn't it? That we look to a place of suffering and pain if we want to see the glory of God.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine a corporation looking at what its logo should look like. You know, can you imagine Sainsbury's or Marks and Spencer's having such a logo as the cross? And I think one of the things of marking Holy Week and Good Friday in the starkness of a stripped church is that sense of focus upon the cross that we can get used to. I once read a very moving account of a doctor who'd spent a long time looking at the effects of the crucifixion to a point that he couldn't actually physically bear to look at an image of the crucified Christ. You know, but we can become rather immune to that horror almost. And actually to spend a moment in Holy Week looking at the glory of the cross, which is so utterly counter-cultural to everything, but particularly thinking that actually this death ends death. You know, so it is a Good Friday, that there is nothing on earth, no horror that can be worse than what Christ does for us for our redemption. Nothing can separate us from the love of God.
When I knew I was going to be consecrated to be a bishop, there's sort of kit that you have to buy and things, rings and mitres and things. And one of the most important pieces, obviously, is the Pectoral Cross. And in mine that I designed myself, I wanted to really reflect exactly what we're talking about. That, because a normal Pectoral Cross would look like this, with the solid silver or gold or very ornate, or have some jewels. I've got a small amethyst stone there. And that's the sort of glory, that's the strength and the victory and the empty cross of Resurrection Sunday, and that's the treasure and the beauty. And actually with my one, I made sure that on the other side it's just the bare wood, and it's very tactile and you can touch the wood. And this is, for me, the cross of Good Friday is it's not glamorous, it's not glorious, it's quite the opposite. But in the economy of God, this is the cross that we boast in. When Paul talks about the foolishness of the gospel, it's that when I look at the cross of Christ, there is the glory of God that has saved me and that has given my life eternal hope and meaning and purpose and freedom and forgiveness. And you know, the list is just endless of his grace and goodness. And so that horrific experience of suffering in my place and the love that drove him there for me is what I boast in.
There's the horror and there's the reality of death that we cannot avoid, and the pain of that. However strong our faith is, there is a pain in losing from our sight those whom we love and grieving for what we're going through in this pandemic. But both of us yesterday, both of us heard something of the life of Charles Borromeo, who lived through a pandemic, a horrific pandemic that went on years, and he sold everything that he had to feed the poor around him, and refused to leave when others who could fled. And it was such a powerful, moving story, wasn't it? If there's somebody who is doing what Jesus does on Monday, Thursday night in the washing of the feet, because he has called us friends, you know. And I'm constantly struck by that line, you know. I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. And when we think about friendship, those who we are friendly with and in a close, strong friendship, you know, that's an incredibly powerful bond. And that's the bond Christ offers us. And he offers it through death and into glorious resurrection.
I suppose as Christians, the challenge of every day, particularly in these hard times, firstly, I think to say to myself is even though things are tough, how can I not protect myself from this difficulty, but how can God use this difficult time to make me more like Christ? That's kind of got to be the first question of every day and of every challenge, is not just to resist or deny or flee, but to say, in this challenge that I am going to go through, am I actually open to how God is going to form me through it to be more the person that he's created me to be? And that's the first kind of formation question. And then it's a service question of others, isn't it? Is how can I use this difficulty to actually try and grow in Christian love, grow in the kind of love that seeks the best for the other person, even when it's at a cost to myself. And some of it's been the simple stuff like wearing a face mask, because some of that is just, I don't really want to. I don't really want to sanitize my hands every 5 minutes. I don't want to walk around in a face mask. I don't want to stay at home and not see but I choose to, and this is a small example, because actually it's at a slight cost to myself, but it's because I love my neighbour that I'll do. And that's a small example, but we've seen many, haven't we, of Christian love in a time of suffering.
Yes. And I think that we have to, whenever fear creeps, our news at the moment is so full of fear. And it's so easy to be caught up in that fear because we live in such uncertain times and so many of our normal structures have been shaken. But the minute we feel that fear, the place to go to reassure us and to banish the darkness of that fear is the Gospels. To immerse ourselves in Scripture, to immerse ourselves in the traditions and those who've sought to live out that Scripture sustained by sacrament down through the ages, to hear what they say to us from other horrific moments in time, should help to banish the darkness of that fear so that we can live in the light of Christ.
Finally, in this passage, by taking the thread back to where we were at the beginning, that the Greeks have come to Philip, who goes to Andrew, who says to Jesus, they want to meet you. And so all of this has been the story of how it is going to be possible for people like you and me, non-Jews, to come into this household, this family of those who are disciples of Jesus. It's through the events of Maundy Thursday and Good Friday, Easter Sunday, that the Father will glorify himself through the death and resurrection of the Son. And then Jesus says, I'll be lifted up on the earth, on the cross, and in doing so I will draw all people to myself. And that this extraordinary place of Golgotha, of the cross, will be the place where all nations are brought to be united and to be saved together. So we do get to the answer to the question eventually, but by the way of the cross. And I suppose that leaves us with a lot of questions. For me, it leaves me with the question about being a seed, not a person who loves their life so much that they're not willing to lay it down, but following the example of Christ as I try to die to myself and be planted and be fruitful. Where is it that God has planted me? And what kind of fruitfulness can my life bring if my life is conformed to this way of the cross? So we hope that leaves you with plenty to discuss. It's a very rich passage indeed. And we pray for you now as you go into your groups, and with the resources we've given you, enjoy a time of wrestling together and growing together as you seek to follow the risen Christ.